The stagecoach carrying Celine Vale should have been her escape to freedom. Instead, it delivered her straight into the arms of the one man who could either save her life or destroy it completely. Cade Mercer never wanted another wife. He'd buried that dream years ago alongside the woman who once made his ranch feel like home. When he sent for a mail-order bride, he demanded one thing: someone ordinary enough to disappear into the landscape. But the woman who stepped off that coach wasn't ordinary. She was running from men powerful enough to burn entire towns looking for her. Stay until the end to see if love can survive when the past refuses to let go. Drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sun hung low over Red Hollow, like a copper coin pressed against the horizon, painting the dusty main street in shades of amber and rust. It was the kind of late afternoon that made everything look either beautiful or doomed, depending on who was watching. The stagecoach rattled into town right on schedule, its wheels kicking up clouds of dirt that settled slowly in the windless air, and half the town found reasons to be near the general store when it pulled to a stop. Mail-order brides were always an event in Red Hollow. Entertainment for the lonely, gossip for the bored, hope for the desperate. The town had seen its share over the years, giggling girls from back east who lasted 3 months before the isolation broke them, widows looking for security who found only hard labor and harder men, women with romantic notions who discovered the frontier had no patience for dreams. But nobody in Red Hollow had ever seen a bride arrive for Cade Mercer. "That's her," Martha Simmons whispered to her daughter, both of them pretending to examine fabric samples through the store window. The woman fool enough to agree to marry that man. The stage door opened. The driver, a grizzled man named Dutch, who'd been running this route for 20 years, climbed down and offered his hand. There was a pause, long enough that some of the watchers wondered if maybe the woman had changed her mind, decided to stay locked inside the coach until Dutch agreed to take her back to civilization. Then she stepped down. Celine Vale didn't look like someone arriving at a new life. She looked like someone who'd already lived 3 lifetimes and survived each one by will alone. She was tall for a woman, maybe 5'7", with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun that had started coming loose somewhere around mile 200. Her dress was gray, serviceable, expensive in a way that made people look twice. Quality fabric, but road-worn, like she'd been traveling in it for weeks. She carried herself with the kind of stillness that came from being watched too often, moving with controlled precision as her eyes swept the street. Those eyes were what people would remember later. Gray as river stones, calm on the surface, but hiding depths that suggested trouble. They cataloged everything: the sheriff leaning against the jailhouse post, the number of horses tied outside the saloon, the narrow alley between the bank and the barber shop, every possible exit from this dusty excuse for a town. She wasn't scanning the street like a newcomer taking in new sights. She was scanning it like someone expecting danger to arrive on the next horse. "She don't look scared," Dutch muttered to himself, hauling down her trunk. "Every other bride I've brought out here looks scared. This one looks like she's ready for war." Celine reached for her leather bag before Dutch could hand it down, keeping it close against her side. It was worn smooth in places where hands had gripped it too many times, and she held it like it contained something more valuable than clothes or letters. Behind her, the other passengers, a traveling salesman and an older couple heading to their son's homestead, climbed out with the grateful sighs of people finished with a long journey. But Celine didn't sigh. She didn't relax. She stood in the middle of the street with her bag clutched tight and waited, because women like her had learned waiting was safer than moving first. The crowd that had gathered began whispering. "She's too pretty for him," someone said. "Cade asked for plain." "Pretty," another voice scoffed. "Look at her eyes. That woman's seen things, probably running from something." "Aren't they all?" Martha Simmons stepped out of the general store, unable to resist the magnetic pull of fresh gossip. "Miss Vale?" Her voice was sweet enough to rot teeth. "I'm Martha Simmons. Welcome to Red Hollow. We're all just so curious, delighted, to meet the woman brave enough to take on Cade Mercer." Celine's expression didn't change. "Is he here?" "Not yet." Martha's smile sharpened. "Cade doesn't come to town much. Doesn't like people. Doesn't like talking. Some say he doesn't like anything except that ranch of his and the memory of his dead wife." She paused, watching for a reaction. "But I'm sure you knew all that when you agreed to come." "I knew enough." "Did you know about the last woman who tried?" Emily Norton, sweet girl from Ohio, lasted 6 weeks before she begged her family to send money for passage home. Said living with Cade was like living with a ghost. A mean one. Celine met Martha's gaze with the kind of steady calm that made the other woman shift her weight. Then it's fortunate I'm not Emily Norton. Before Martha could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the main street. The crowd turned as one, and even Celine, who'd been careful not to show interest in anything, allowed her eyes to track toward the approaching rider. Cade Mercer rode into town like a man who'd forgotten towns existed. He sat his horse with the casual confidence of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than walking, his broad shoulders outlined against the setting sun. He was 38, but looked older, the kind of weathered that came from years of sun and wind and the weight of memories nobody wanted to carry. His face was all hard angles, strong jaw darkened with stubble, deep-set eyes the color of storm clouds, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He wore work clothes, nothing fancy, and his hat was pulled low enough to shadow most of his expression. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd spent years building walls between himself and anything that might make him feel human again. Cade pulled his horse to a stop 15 feet from where Celine stood. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. She looked back, equally unreadable, and the watching crowd held its breath. This was always the moment that determined everything. When the man saw the woman he'd paid an agency to send him, when reality met expectation, when both sides decided whether they could go through with a bargain made through letters and desperation. Finally, Cade spoke. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "You Celine Vale?" "I am." "You got everything you need?" She gestured to her trunk and the bag she held. "This is it." He nodded once, dismounted, and walked past her to lift her trunk like it weighed nothing. He secured it to his horse with efficient movements, not wasting words or energy. The crowd waited for something more, a greeting, an introduction, maybe even a smile, but Cade Mercer gave them nothing. "We've got 2 hours of daylight left," he said, still not looking directly at her. "Ranch is 90 minutes north. We should go." Celine didn't move. "I'd like to see the contract first." That made him turn. His eyes met hers properly for the first time, and something flickered in them. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "The contract. The agreement between us. Terms, expectations. What happens if either party wishes to dissolve the arrangement?" Her voice was steady, businesslike. "I was told there would be documentation." Martha Simmons gasped softly. "Well, I've never—" "It's in my saddlebag," Cade interrupted, pulling out a folded paper. He handed it to Celine without ceremony. "Standard territorial marriage contract. You work the house, I work the land. You get room, board, protection, and my name. I get a functioning household. Either of us wants out after the first year, we file papers and go separate ways. Simple." Celine unfolded the paper and read it carefully, her eyes tracking each line while the entire town watched in fascination. No other mail-order bride in Red Hollow history had demanded to see legal documents before mounting a horse with her future husband. Most were too afraid, too desperate, or too romantic to think about such practical matters. But Celine Vale wasn't most women. "This says the arrangement can be dissolved with mutual consent or cause," she said, looking up. "What constitutes cause?" "Abandonment, violence, theft, breaking the peace." Cade's jaw tightened slightly. "I don't hit women. I don't tolerate stealing, and I keep my word when I give it. That's all you need to know." "And if someone comes looking for me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The crowd went silent. Even Martha Simmons stopped pretending to adjust her bonnet. Cade studied Celine's face for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter. "Then you tell me who's looking and why, and we handle it." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He held out his hand. "Now, are we going, or are we giving this town enough gossip to last until Christmas?" Celine folded the contract, tucked it into her bag, and placed her hand in his. His grip was calloused, strong, and surprisingly steady. He helped her mount behind him, and she settled onto the horse with the practiced ease of someone who'd ridden before, her arms loosely circling his waist. Cade clicked his tongue, and the horse moved forward at an easy walk. Behind them, Red Hollow erupted in whispered speculation that would fuel conversations for weeks. They rode in silence through the town and out onto the open plain. The sun continued its descent, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and shadow. Mountains rose in the distance like sentinels, and somewhere out there, hidden in the folds of the northern ridge, was the ranch that would become Celine's new home. After 20 minutes, Cade spoke without turning his head. "You ride before?" "Some." "You run from someone?" Celine's arms tightened slightly around his waist. "Why do you think that?" "Because you've got the eyes of someone who checks every exit before sitting down. And that bag you're carrying, you held on to it like it's got your entire life packed inside." He paused. "Also, you asked what happens if someone comes looking for you. Women who aren't running don't ask that question." For a moment, Celine considered lying, but something about the blunt honesty in Cade's voice suggested lies wouldn't work with this man. "I left a situation back east that some people believe I had no right to leave." "What kind of situation?" "The kind arranged by powerful men who think money buys ownership." Cade was quiet for several heartbeats. Then, "Did they hurt you?" "They tried to control me." "That's hurt enough." "But you got away." "For now." "And you think they'll keep looking?" "I know they will." Celine's voice was steady, matter of fact. "My father is Jonathan Vale. He owns half the railroad expansion into Western Territories. When I disappeared, I didn't just embarrass him. I cost him a business alliance worth millions. Men like him don't accept losses." Cade processed this information without visible reaction. "You could have told the marriage agency you needed someone farther west. Montana Territory, Oregon, places your father's influence doesn't reach." "I thought about it, but running forever isn't living. It's just a slower kind of dying." She paused. "The agency said you wanted someone ordinary, someone quiet who wouldn't cause trouble. I thought maybe a remote ranch near a small town would be the perfect place to disappear, ordinary enough to overlook." "You're not ordinary." "No," Celine agreed, "but I can be quiet when it matters." They rode on as twilight deepened around them. The landscape transformed in the fading light. Shadows grew longer, colors richer, and the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, lonely and wild. "The ranch," Cade said eventually. "It's not fancy. House is solid, but it needs work. I've been letting things slide since—" He stopped himself. "For a few years now. Kitchen needs attention. Some of the rooms are closed off." "Why?" "Because I don't use them." "Why not?" His shoulders tensed beneath her arms. "Because they belong to someone else, and I'm not ready to change them." Celine understood immediately. The dead wife Martha Simmons had mentioned. "How long has she been gone?" 4 years, 3 months. The precision of his answer told Celine everything she needed to know about how deeply the loss still cut. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She made her choice. The bitterness in those words was sharp enough to draw blood. Celine didn't push for more. Everyone had wounds they weren't ready to expose, and she respected the boundary he'd drawn. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a collection of buildings silhouetted against the purple sky. The main house was 2 stories, constructed from local timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, stable, storage shed, and what looked like a bunkhouse, though Celine saw no signs of workers. Everything had the worn-down look of a place that had once been loved, but was now merely endured. Cade guided the horse to the front of the house and dismounted, then helped Celine down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, but she steadied herself quickly, her hand automatically going to her leather bag. "Barn needs mucking," Cade said, already untying her trunk. "Garden's overgrown. Kitchen pump sticks sometimes. You have to work the handle back and forth to get it flowing. Wood stacked behind the house. Chickens are in the coop out back, assuming the foxes haven't gotten them all." He carried her trunk up the porch steps. "There's a bedroom upstairs, first door on the right. It's yours. I sleep downstairs." Celine followed him inside. The house smelled of dust and disuse, with underlying notes of wood smoke and something else, abandonment, maybe. The interior was dark, and Cade lit a lamp with practiced efficiency, revealing a main room that had once been comfortable but now felt hollow. Furniture sat in place, but everything had the untouched quality of a museum exhibit. No clutter, no personal touches, no signs that anyone actually lived here rather than just existing within these walls. "I'll make something to eat," Cade said, setting her trunk by the stairs. "You can settle in." I can cook. Not tonight. You've been traveling for days. I'll handle it. He disappeared into the kitchen before she could argue. Celine stood alone in the main room, taking in her new reality. This wasn't the worst situation she'd imagined. The house was solid, remote, defensible. Cade Mercer seemed hard but not cruel, distant but not dangerous. She could work with distant. She'd survived far worse than a man who preferred silence. She climbed the stairs with her bag still clutched tight, each step creaking under her weight. The hallway stretched dark before her, and she counted 4 doors, 1 open, 3 closed. The open door revealed a simple bedroom, iron bed frame with a patchwork quilt, washstand with a chipped basin, small wardrobe, and a single window overlooking the northern ridge. It was plain, practical, and blessedly empty of expectations. Celine set her bag on the bed and opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in a spare dress, was a small pistol and a stack of papers, identity documents, letters, banknotes, and a photograph she'd torn in half. She hid the pistol under the mattress, buried the papers in the bottom of the wardrobe beneath spare linens, and burned the photograph in the wash basin, watching her old life curl into ash. When she came back downstairs, Cade had managed to produce a simple meal: bread, cheese, cold meat, and coffee that could strip paint. They ate at the kitchen table in near silence, the only sounds the clink of utensils and the settling of the house around them. Finally, Cade pushed his plate away. "Rules," he said. "I work early, before dawn. Don't expect conversation in the morning. I handle everything outside: animals, fields, repairs. You handle inside: cooking, cleaning, mending. I don't pry into your business. You don't pry into mine. We're partners in maintaining this place, nothing more. Clear?" "Clear." "You need supplies? Make a list. I go to town once a month. You want to go with me? That's fine, but be prepared for questions. People talk." "I noticed." "And about your father?" Cade's expression hardened. "If men come looking, I need to know immediately. I won't hand you over, but I won't be caught unprepared either. This ranch is all I have left. I'll defend it, and anyone under its roof, but I need honest information to do that. Understood?" Celine met his eyes. "Understood. And thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't survived a winter here." He stood, carried his plate to the sink, and paused at the doorway. "One more thing. The room at the end of the upstairs hall, it stays locked. Don't try to open it. Don't ask about it. It's not part of our arrangement." Before Celine could respond, he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs leading to whatever space he'd claimed as his own on the ground floor. Celine finished her meal slowly, thinking about locked doors and the secrets they kept. In her experience, people locked away the things they couldn't bear to look at. Memories too painful, truths too sharp, losses too devastating to process. Cade Mercer was a man living in a house full of ghosts, and she'd just agreed to haunt it alongside him. She washed the dishes, dried them, and put them away in cabinets that clearly hadn't been organized by anyone who cared about efficiency. Then she climbed back upstairs to her plain little room, changed into a nightgown, and lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home. Wind against the walls, boards settling, mice in the rafters, and somewhere below the faint creak of floorboards as Cade Mercer paced like a man who'd forgotten how to sleep. Celine stared at the ceiling, mentally cataloging everything she'd learned today. Cade was damaged but decent. The ranch was isolated but accessible. The town was small but watchful. She had time, maybe weeks, possibly months, before her father's reach extended this far north. Time to build defenses. Time to become someone new. Time to decide if Cade Mercer was someone she could trust with the truth of who was really hunting her. Outside her window, the night settled deep over the frontier. Somewhere out there, beyond the ridge and the grasslands and the mountains, men with money and power were looking for a woman who dared to say no. They had resources, connections, and the absolute certainty that everything, including people, could be bought or taken. But they hadn't met Celine Vale yet. Not the real her. Not the woman who'd spent 4 months learning to shoot, to hide, to survive, and most importantly, to fight back when cornered. And they definitely hadn't met Cade Mercer, a man who'd already lost everything once and had nothing left to lose by standing his ground. As Celine finally drifted towards sleep, she thought about the contract she'd read earlier, the one that promised protection and a name in exchange for domestic labor. It seemed like such a simple transaction on paper, but standing between a powerful man and the daughter he considered property, That was going to cost far more than either of them had bargained for. Dawn came cold and blue, creeping through Celine's window like an uninvited guest. She woke instantly, the way she'd trained herself to over the past months. No gradual return to consciousness, just immediate alertness. Old habits from sleeping in hotel rooms where every footstep in the hallway might mean danger. She dressed quickly in her simplest work dress, braided her hair tight, and made her way downstairs. The house was silent, but when she entered the kitchen, she found evidence that Cade had already been up for hours. Empty coffee cup in the sink, mud tracked across the floor from his boots, and the back door standing slightly ajar. Through the window, she could see him working near the barn, his movements efficient and practiced as he hauled hay bales. He hadn't been exaggerating about the early starts. Celine spent the morning exploring the house properly, taking inventory of what existed and what was needed. The kitchen was functional, but barely. Half the shelves empty, supplies poorly organized, everything coated in the kind of dust that accumulated when a man stopped caring about details. She found a broom and started sweeping, working methodically from room to room. The main floor revealed a man who'd given up on comfort. Furniture positioned without thought for conversation or relaxation. No decorations, no photographs, no personal touches except for one. Above the fireplace hung a wedding photograph, slightly faded, showing a younger Cade standing beside a beautiful blonde woman with bright eyes and a smile that suggested she'd never known a day of hardship. Celine studied the image for a long moment, understanding more about Cade's silence than any words could convey. The woman in the photograph looked nothing like her. Where Celine was dark and guarded, this woman had been light and open. Where Celine moved with controlled precision, this woman appeared to have danced through life. No wonder Martha Simmons had mentioned her. This was the ghost Cade lived with, the standard against which any new woman would be measured and found wanting. Celine left the photograph alone and continued her inspection. She discovered a small office off the main room, crammed with ledgers and paperwork in complete disarray. Bills months overdue, correspondence unanswered, accounts that made no sense because they'd been neglected too long. It was the paperwork of a man drowning slowly, unable to keep his head above water, while grief pulled him down. She was bent over a particularly confusing set of supply orders when Cade's voice startled her. "What are you doing?" Celine turned to find him standing in the doorway, covered in hay dust and suspicion. "Looking at your accounts. They're a mess." His jaw tightened. "I didn't ask you to go. You're overpaying for grain by at least 20% because you're ordering from the wrong supplier. Your fence repairs are 3 months behind schedule, which means you're losing livestock to predators you could easily keep out. And according to these ledgers, you haven't balanced your books since—" She glanced at the dates. "Since your wife died." The words hung between them like a challenge. Cade's expression went flat, dangerous. "The office is off limits. The contract says I handle the house. This is part of the house. It's my business, and it's failing." Celine stood, meeting his anger with calm directness. "I'm not trying to intrude on your grief, Mr. Mercer. I'm trying to keep this ranch from bankrupting itself while you're too busy being miserable to notice you're about to lose everything." For a moment, she thought he might order her out, might even throw her out physically, contract or no contract, but instead something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the faint stirring of respect for someone willing to speak plainly. "You understand bookkeeping? My father owned 17 companies. I learned accounting before I learned to read properly." She gestured at the desk. "Give me 3 days with these records, and I'll have them organized enough that you can actually understand where your money's going." Cade studied her for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes weighing something she couldn't quite read. Finally, he nodded once. 3 days. But you don't make any decisions without telling me first." "Agreed." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Celine?" "My wife's name was Caroline. If you're going to work in here, you'll see it everywhere. I'm not ready to change that yet." "I'm not asking you to change anything," Celine said quietly. "I'm just asking you to stop letting this place die with her." Jet. The 3 days Celine requested turned into 2 weeks of systematic repair. She worked from dawn until late evening, transforming the house from a mausoleum into something that resembled a home. She scrubbed floors, organized pantries, mended curtains, and fixed the kitchen pump that Cade had been fighting for months. She discovered that the root cellar was half flooded and enlisted Cade's help to dig proper drainage. She found Caroline's old garden plot buried under weeds and began clearing it, not because she wanted to erase the previous woman's presence, but because good soil shouldn't go to waste. And every evening, she worked in the office, slowly building order from chaos. Cade watched all of this with wary confusion, like he couldn't quite believe someone was actually fixing things instead of just complaining about them. He started leaving her coffee in the mornings, strong and black. She started leaving him dinner in the evenings, hot and substantial. They existed in parallel orbits, circling each other carefully, two damaged people learning to share space without collision. It was during the third week that the pattern broke. Celine was in the garden at mid-morning, wrestling with a particularly stubborn root system when she heard horses approaching fast. Multiple riders, moving with purpose. Her blood went cold. She dropped her tools and ran for the house, her mind already calculating. The pistol was upstairs under her mattress. Too far. Cade was out checking the northern fence line. Too far. She had maybe 2 minutes before whoever was coming reached the ranch. But when she burst through the back door, Cade was already there, standing in the kitchen with his rifle in hand. His expression was grim. "How many?" he asked. "At least 3 horses, maybe more." "You expecting them?" "I'm always expecting them." Cade moved to the window, keeping himself back from direct view. Outside, 4 riders pulled up to the front of the house, well-dressed men on expensive horses, completely wrong for this landscape. The leader dismounted with the easy confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Stay inside," Cade said. "Don't show yourself unless I call for you." "Cade, I mean it. If they're here for you, letting them see you just confirms they've got the right place." Before she could argue, he was out the door, leaving his rifle propped just inside but clearly visible. Celine positioned herself where she could hear but not be seen, her heart hammering. The leader of the group was tall, impeccably groomed, with the kind of polished appearance that marked him as Eastern money. His smile was professional and didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning. I'm looking for Cade Mercer." "You found him." Cade's voice was flat, giving nothing. "Excellent. My name is Thomas Barrett. I represent the Vale family, railroad interests out of Philadelphia. We're searching for someone, and we believe you might have information that could help us." "I doubt that." "A young woman, mid-20s, dark hair, traveling alone. She would have arrived in this area within the last few weeks." Barrett pulled out a photograph. "Her name is Celine Vale. Her family is very concerned about her welfare." Cade barely glanced at the photograph. "Haven't seen her." "Are you certain? We have reason to believe she might have used a marriage agency to relocate, and we understand you recently acquired a wife through such an arrangement." The silence stretched long enough to become its own kind of answer. Celine held her breath, waiting to see which way this moment would break. "I did acquire a wife," Cade said finally. "Woman named Mary Smith from Kansas. Arrived 3 weeks ago. She's in town today, helping at the church social." Barrett's smile sharpened. "I see. Would you mind if we searched your property? Just to be thorough." "I would mind." Cade's tone hardened. "This is private land. You've got no authority here, and I don't take kindly to strangers demanding access to my home." "Mr. Mercer, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." Cade stepped forward, and despite being outnumbered, he somehow made the 4 men shift backward. "You're trespassing. You're harassing a property owner, and you're about 5 seconds away from meeting the local sheriff, who's a personal friend and doesn't appreciate wealthy men from back east throwing their weight around in his territory." It was a calculated bluff. Celine had heard enough about Cade to know he had no friends, in the sheriff's office or anywhere else. But Barrett didn't know that. What he saw was a hard frontier rancher with a rifle within reach, and the absolute certainty of someone willing to make this situation ugly. Barrett's professional smile returned, but it was thinner now. "Of course. I apologize for any inconvenience. However, if you do happen to encounter Miss Vale, there's a substantial reward for information leading to her return." He produced a card. "You can reach me at the Red Hollow Telegraph office." Cade didn't take the card. Barrett laid it on the porch railing and remounted his horse. The 4 men turned and rode away at a measured pace, not hurrying but not lingering either. Cade watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he came back inside, closed the door, and locked it for the first time since Celine had arrived. She stepped out of her hiding place. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." His expression was dark. "They'll be back." And next time they'll bring more men or legal documentation or some excuse that makes it harder to turn them away. He turned to face her fully. I need the complete truth now, Celine. No edited versions, no partial stories. Who is Thomas Barrett, and why does your family want you back badly enough to send professional hunters halfway across the country? Celine moved to the kitchen table and sat down, her legs suddenly unsteady. Barrett is my father's head of security. He's ex-Pinkerton, very good at finding people who don't want to be found. As for why, she took a breath. My father arranged for me to marry a man named Charles Whitmore, steel magnate, twice my age, with a reputation for violence against women that everyone knows but no one discusses because he's too rich to touch. And you refused. I refused. Publicly, at a party with 200 witnesses. I humiliated my father and cost him a merger that would have expanded his railroad into Western steel production. Her hands tightened into fists. He told me I'd embarrassed the family beyond forgiveness, that if I didn't apologize and go through with the marriage, I'd be disowned, penniless, and alone. So you ran. So I disappeared, took money I'd inherited from my mother, money he couldn't touch legally, and used it to create a new identity. The marriage agency was supposed to be my escape route, a way to vanish into the frontier where my father's reach couldn't extend. She met Cade's eyes. I knew it was a risk coming here. I knew there was a chance they'd find me eventually, but I hoped I'd have more time before... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Cade was silent for a long moment, processing everything she'd said. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. If I send you away now, tonight, you could be in Montana by the end of the week. Farther if you keep moving. I've got contacts who could help you disappear properly. Is that what you want? What I want is for my life to stay simple and uncomplicated. What I want is to work my land without dealing with railroad tycoons and Pinkerton men. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. But what I want stopped mattering a long time ago. I'll leave if you ask me to, Celine said quietly. I won't fight you on it. Where would you go? I don't know. Somewhere. Anywhere. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes told a different story, the exhaustion of running, the weight of always being afraid. I've gotten good at starting over. Cade looked at her for a long moment, really looked, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as the mail-order bride he'd requested, or the problem that had just landed on his doorstep, but as a person who'd fought hard to escape a life built by someone else's choices. Caroline used to say I was too stubborn to know when to quit, he said finally. She was probably right. He moved to the window, staring out at his land. I asked for someone ordinary because I didn't want complications, didn't want to care, didn't want to risk anything that might hurt again. He turned back to face her. But you're here now, and those men think they can just take what they want from my property, from my home. Cade, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay. We're going to maintain the story that you're Mary Smith from Kansas, my perfectly ordinary mail-order bride. And if Barrett or anyone else comes back here asking questions, we're going to make their lives difficult enough that they decide you're not worth the trouble. Celine stared at him. Why? Why would you do that? His answer was simple, honest, and devastating in its directness. Because 4 years ago, I didn't fight hard enough to protect what mattered. I let grief make me weak. I let the world take things from me without raising my fists. His jaw set in a hard line. I'm done with that. This ranch is mine. Anyone under its roof is under my protection. And I don't care how much money your father has. He doesn't get to decide what happens on my land. For the first time since fleeing Philadelphia, Celine felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone running, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who might actually have a place to stand and fight. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Cade repeated. We're about to make some very powerful people very angry. It's going to get ugly before it gets better. I know. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Celine, if we're doing this, I need you to teach me everything you know about your father's operation, his resources, his methods, who he trusts. I can't defend against an enemy I don't understand. I will. Starting tonight, after dinner. He opened the door, letting in afternoon sunlight. Right now, I need to check those fences, and you should probably stop working in the garden where anyone with a spyglass could watch you from the ridge. He was gone before she could respond, leaving Celine alone in the kitchen with the weight of what they'd just agreed to. She looked around at the house she'd been cleaning and organizing, the home she'd been carefully building from the broken pieces Cade had left scattered. It wasn't much. A remote ranch, a damaged man, and a partnership forged from mutual desperation rather than anything resembling affection. But it was hers. For the first time in her life, Celine had chosen where she stood and who she stood with. Not her father's choice, not some arranged marriage, not the safe path or the expected one. Her choice, her ground, her fight. And if Thomas Barrett thought he could take that away from her, he was about to learn what happened when you cornered someone with nothing left to lose. Outside, Cade Mercer worked his fences with steady determination, building barriers that were both literal and metaphorical. Behind him, the house stood solid against the Montana wind. No longer a tomb for the past, but something new, a fortress, a sanctuary, a place worth defending. And inside that fortress, Celine Vale began planning for war. That evening, after the sun had bled out across the horizon and the first stars pricked holes in the darkening sky, Celine and Cade sat across from each other at the kitchen table like generals planning a campaign. Between them lay paper, pencil, and the cold remains of dinner neither had paid much attention to eating. "Start with the money," Cade said, his voice all business. "How much can your father spend to get you back?" Celine didn't hesitate. Essentially unlimited, Jonathan Vale's net worth is somewhere north of $8 million, and that's just what's documented. He has accounts in 3 countries, investments in everything from railroads to mining operations to political campaigns. She met Cade's eyes. "If he wants to buy this entire town to smoke me out, he can do it before breakfast." Cade absorbed this without flinching. "Then money won't stop him. What will?" "Public embarrassment, legal complications, anything that threatens his reputation or business interests." Celine leaned forward. "My father built his empire on the illusion of control. He's the man who always wins, who never loses, who bends reality to his will through force of personality and unlimited resources. Having his daughter publicly refuse an arranged marriage and then disappear? That's not just personal. It's a crack in his armor that his competitors can exploit. So he needs you back to prove he's still in control." "Exactly. If I stay gone, I become a story. The daughter who escaped. The woman who said no to Jonathan Vale and lived to tell about it." Her smile was sharp and humorless. "That story is dangerous to a man whose entire life is built on the certainty that he can control everything and everyone around him." Cade tapped the pencil against the table, thinking. "Barrett and his men, they're just the first wave. What comes next? Legal pressure. My father will try to have me declared mentally incompetent, claim I was kidnapped or coerced, maybe even suggest you're holding me against my will for ransom." Celine's voice remained steady, clinical, like she was discussing weather patterns instead of her own potential imprisonment. "He'll use the courts, the territorial governor, anyone with power he can buy or threaten. And if that doesn't work, then what? Then he'll stop playing by rules altogether." She looked down at her hands. "Charles Whitmore, the man I was supposed to marry, has his own security force. Men who handle problems that can't be solved through legal channels. If my father gets desperate enough, he'll unleash them." The lamp flickered, casting moving shadows across both their faces. Outside, wind pushed against the house with the insistent pressure of something trying to get in. "How long do we have?" Cade asked. "Before Barrett comes back?" "A week. Maybe 2. He'll telegraph my father for instructions, wait for reinforcements or new strategies, but he won't give up." Celine's jaw tightened. "I humiliated him today. Made him back down in front of his men. He'll take that personally." "Good. Angry men make mistakes." Cade stood, moved to the window, stared out at his land rendered invisible by darkness. "We need allies. People who will back our story about Mary Smith from Kansas, who will testify you've been here for months if anyone asks, who will make it legally complicated for your father to just take you." "Do you have people like that?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No, but I know someone who might." The next morning, Cade rode into Red Hollow alone, leaving Celine at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the rifle loaded. She watched him disappear over the ridge, then turned back to the house that had become both sanctuary and potential trap. She spent the day fortifying. Not physically, the house was already solid, built to withstand Montana winters and frontier hardships, but strategically. She mapped every sightline to the property, identified every approach an enemy could take, noted every place where someone could hide and watch. She tested all the doors and windows, making sure each could be locked and barred from inside. She moved supplies into the cellar, creating a stockpile in case they needed to hunker down for an extended siege. It felt paranoid, excessive, like the preparations of someone whose fear had turned them into something less than human. But Celine had learned the hard way that paranoia was just pattern recognition for people who'd survived enough attempts to recognize the patterns. When Cade returned in late afternoon, he wasn't alone. Riding beside him was a man in his 50s, weather-beaten and lean, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen most of what life had to offer and wasn't particularly impressed by any of it. He wore a sheriff's badge, tarnished but real. Cade helped the man dismount and led him to the porch where Celine waited. "This is Frank Hollis. He's the law in Red Hollow and about 6 other settlements within a 100-mile radius." Hollis studied Celine with sharp, evaluating eyes. "Ma'am, Cade tells me you've got trouble following you from back east." "That's one way to describe it." "He also tells me you're legally married under territorial law, which means you're a resident with full rights and protections." Hollis shifted his weight. "Question is, do you want those protections? Because accepting them means putting your name on official documents, creating a paper trail your father can follow." Celine glanced at Cade, who gave her a small nod. "Your choice," his expression said. She turned back to Hollis. "What are my alternatives?" "You stay Mary Smith, Cade's mail-order bride from Kansas. No official registration, no paperwork, just the word of a property owner that you belong here. It's weaker legally, but it's harder to track." Hollis pulled out a pipe, started packing it with tobacco. "Problem is, if your father's men come with a warrant or court order, I've got no legal grounds to protect you. I'd have to turn you over. And if I register officially, then you're Celine Mercer, legal wife of a property owner in good standing. Your father can't just take you. He'd need to prove criminal activity, coercion, or mental incompetence. That takes time, evidence, and a judge willing to go against territorial marriage law." Hollis lit his pipe, drew deep. "Buys you time at least. Maybe enough time to make your father decide you're not worth the trouble." Cade spoke up. "There's a third option. We could get the marriage annulled, claim it was never consummated, send Celine somewhere else before Barrett comes back." "No." Celine's voice was firm. "I'm done running. If I have to run from here, I'll be running for the rest of my life. There's nowhere far enough, no place remote enough that a man with unlimited money can't eventually find me." She looked at Hollis. "I'll register. Celine Mercer. Make it official and legal and documented. Let my father know exactly where I am and dare him to do something about it." Hollis raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold strategy. It's the only one that matters. Running is just slow defeat, standing still and making them come through legal channels. That's where I have leverage." "She's right," Cade said quietly. "And it forces Jonathan Vale to play a public game. Hard to disappear someone when everyone knows where they are and who they're married to." Hollis puffed his pipe, considering. "I'll need both of you to come into town tomorrow, sign the documents, make it official in front of witnesses. Fair warning, once it's registered, every telegraph operator and newspaper editor in the territory will know about it within 48 hours. Your father will know where you are before the ink dries." "Good," Celine said. "Let him know. Let him understand I chose this, that I'm not hiding, not ashamed, not afraid enough to keep running." Hollis and Cade exchanged a look. Two men recognizing courage when they saw it, even if they also recognized the enormous risk it represented. The sheriff knocked ash from his pipe. "All right then, tomorrow, 10 o'clock, my office. I'll have the territorial registrar there with the paperwork." He moved toward his horse, then paused. "One more thing. Word of advice from someone who's been wearing this badge for 20 years. When powerful men get desperate, they stop caring about laws or consequences. If things get ugly, if Barrett comes back with more men or meaner intentions, you send someone to get me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone." "We won't," Cade said, though his tone suggested he absolutely would. After Hollis rode away, Celine and Cade stood together on the porch, watching twilight transform the landscape into something otherworldly. Neither spoke for several minutes, both processing what they'd just committed to. Finally, Cade broke the silence. "You sure about this? Once we sign those papers, there's no taking it back without lawyers and time and complications." I'm sure. Celine turned to face him. But I need to know something first. Why are you doing this? Really doing this? It can't just be about protecting your property or standing your ground. You could sell this ranch, start over somewhere else, avoid all of this. Cade was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds never properly healed. 4 years ago, Caroline got sick. Started small, headaches, dizziness, nothing that seemed serious. By the time we realized how bad it was, the illness had already taken root too deep to fight. He stared out at the darkening land. I brought in doctors from back east, spent everything I had on treatments and medicines and specialists who all told me the same thing. Nothing to be done except make her comfortable. Celine waited, sensing there was more. The last month she was in so much pain that even breathing hurt, and I stood by her bed every day feeling completely powerless. Couldn't save her, couldn't ease her suffering, couldn't do anything except watch someone I loved slip away while I did nothing. His hands tightened into fists. She asked me once if I'd fight for her, if I'd fight for us, for the life we'd built. And I told her I was fighting, but the truth was I'd already given up. I'd already accepted that she was going to die, and there was nothing I could do about it. Cade, she knew. In those final days, she knew I'd stopped fighting, knew I was just waiting for the end instead of raging against it. He turned to look at Celine, and his eyes held something raw and painful. So when you ask why I'm doing this, why I'm standing against your father, why I'm willing to risk everything I have left, it's because I can't be that man again. The man who gave up. The man who let the world take what mattered without putting up a fight. Celine understood then. This wasn't about her, not really. It was about a man trying to redeem himself for a failure that had haunted him for 4 years. Trying to become someone who fought back instead of surrendering to inevitability. I'm not Caroline, she said softly. I know. And this situation, it's not the same as illness or fate or things beyond anyone's control. This is just men with money who think power means they can ignore what people want. I know that too. Cade met her eyes steadily. But maybe that's exactly why it matters. Because this is a fight I can actually win. Not against death or disease or things nobody can control, but against men who can bleed and break and be made to understand that some things aren't for sale. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Celine felt something shift between them, a connection forged not from romance or attraction, but from something deeper and more durable. Mutual recognition of wounds that hadn't healed, parallel paths through loss and survival, and the fragile hope that standing together might be stronger than standing alone. Thank you, she said, for telling me. Don't thank me yet. We've still got a war to fight. They went inside as full darkness fell, and Celine cooked dinner while Cade cleaned his rifle with methodical precision. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of tomorrow and what it would mean to make their arrangement permanent and public. Later that night, as Celine lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, she heard it again, the sound of Cade pacing downstairs, his footsteps a steady rhythm of someone who'd forgotten how to rest. She wondered if he was thinking about Caroline, about the room at the end of the hall that stayed locked, about all the ways the past could trap you, even when you were trying desperately to move forward. She wondered if tomorrow would give them both a chance at something different. Not healing. Healing took time and work and more courage than either of them probably had, but maybe a purpose, a reason to keep fighting that had nothing to do with the wounds they carried and everything to do with the future they could build if they were stubborn enough to survive. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Another answered. The frontier night settled around the ranch like a blanket, dark and vast and full of hidden dangers. But inside the house, 2 people slept fitfully, dreaming of battles yet to come. The next morning arrived sharp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made Montana look like something out of a painting, all gold grass and blue sky and mountains cutting sharp lines against the horizon. Celine dressed carefully, choosing her best remaining dress, the one she'd saved from her old life. It was deep green, well-made, and marked her as someone with money and breeding. If she was going to register as Celine Mercer, she wanted the town to see exactly who Jonathan Vale's daughter had chosen to become. Cade was already waiting by the horses when she came down, dressed in clean clothes that looked uncomfortable on him, a man more at home in work gear than anything approaching formal. He helped her mount, and they rode toward Red Hollow in silence, each preparing for the performance they were about to give. The town was busier than Celine remembered from her arrival, with people moving between buildings on morning errands and business. Several faces turned to watch as she and Cade rode past, and the whispers started immediately. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered nearby, pretending to have legitimate reasons for loitering but clearly present to witness whatever was about to happen. Sheriff Hollis met them at the door with a grim expression. "Fair warning, Martha Simmons is inside. Showed up 20 minutes ago claiming she needed to witness any official business involving new residents. Couldn't find a legal reason to exclude her." Cade's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They followed Hollis into the office, where Martha sat in the corner wearing her best dress and an expression of barely concealed anticipation. Beside her stood the territorial registrar, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the permanently skeptical look of someone who'd processed too many questionable documents. "Mr. Mercer, Miss Vale." The registrar gestured to chairs positioned in front of his desk. "Please sit. This shouldn't take long." Celine and Cade sat, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The registrar shuffled papers, cleared his throat, and began the bureaucratic ritual that would transform two strangers into legally recognized partners. "For the record, state your full names." "Cade William Mercer." "Celine Marie Vale," Martha gasped audibly. The registrar's eyebrows rose slightly, but he continued writing. "Miss Vale, is that your legal name? No married name from a previous union?" "It's my legal name. I've never been married." "And Mr. Mercer, you are widowed, correct?" 4 years. Cade's voice was flat, giving nothing. "I see." More writing. "Miss Vale, for the record, are you entering into this marriage of your own free will, without coercion, threat, or pressure from any party?" "I am." "And you understand that territorial marriage law grants full legal rights and responsibilities to both parties, including property ownership, financial obligations, and parental authority should children result from the union?" "I understand." Martha couldn't contain herself any longer. "Sheriff Hollis, surely you can't allow this. Everyone knows Miss Vale, if that's even her real name, only arrived 2 weeks ago. This is clearly a fraudulent marriage designed to help her hide from something." Hollis didn't even glance at her. "Mrs. Simmons, unless you have legal grounds to challenge this registration, I suggest you keep your opinions to yourself." "But her family has no legal authority over a woman of age entering into a voluntary marriage contract in territorial lands." Hollis's tone could have frozen water. "Now sit down and be quiet, or I'll remove you from these proceedings." Martha sat, her face flushed with indignation, but she'd gotten what she wanted, confirmation that Celine Vale, daughter of someone important enough to pursue across state lines, was indeed the woman marrying Cade Mercer. The gossip would spread through Red Hollow like wildfire, and from there to every telegraph office within 100 miles. The registrar continued, "Mr. Mercer, do you confirm that you are entering this marriage voluntarily, and that you accept legal responsibility for your wife's welfare and protection?" "I do." "And do both parties acknowledge that this marriage supersedes any previous arrangements, contracts, or family obligations either party may have had prior to this date?" "Yes," Celine said firmly. "Yes," Cade echoed. "Then by the authority vested in me by the territorial government, I pronounce you legally married under territorial law, with all rights and responsibilities therein." The registrar signed the document with a flourish, then turned it around for them to sign. "Your signatures here, please. And we'll need 2 witnesses." Hollis signed first, his signature bold and clear. Then, surprisingly, Martha stood and approached the desk. "I'll witness," she said, her voice tight. "Someone needs to document this disaster properly." She signed with sharp, angry strokes, then stepped back as if the paper might contaminate her. The registrar blotted the signatures, stamped the document with an official seal, and handed a copy to Cade. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Mercer. Your marriage is now registered and recognized throughout the territory." They stood, and Celine felt the weight of what they'd just done settle over her like a physical thing. She was no longer Celine Vale, runaway daughter. She was Celine Mercer, married woman, with all the legal protections and complications that implied. Martha followed them outside, unable to resist one final jab. "I give it 3 months before your father's lawyers have this annulled. You can't run from family, Miss Vale, Mrs. Mercer, whoever you think you are now." Celine turned to face her, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly enough for everyone lingering nearby to hear. "My father doesn't own me, Mrs. Simmons. No one does. I chose this marriage, this man, and this life. And if Jonathan Vale or anyone else has a problem with that, they can take it up with territorial law." She mounted her horse without waiting for Cade's help, spine straight, head high, every inch the woman who'd been raised in Philadelphia society but had decided the frontier suited her better. Cade swung into his saddle beside her, and they rode out of Red Hollow together, leaving behind a town buzzing with the kind of scandal that would be discussed for years. They didn't speak until they were well clear of town, riding across open grassland with nothing but sky and distance around them. Finally, Cade broke the silence. "That was quite a speech. Someone needed to say it. You realize everyone in Red Hollow will be talking about you now. About us. Good. Let them talk. The more public this is, the harder it is for my father to make me disappear quietly." Celine glanced at him. "Are you having second thoughts? About standing against a railroad tycoon and his hired men? About putting myself between a powerful man and something he wants? About volunteering for a fight that could cost me everything I own?" Cade's expression was unreadable. "Little late for second thoughts, Mrs. Mercer." The name hung between them. Not quite real yet, not quite natural, but carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. They were legally bound now, partners in defiance against forces neither of them fully understood. When they reached the ranch, Cade helped her dismount, and they stood together in the yard, neither quite ready to go inside and resume normal life after the morning's intensity. "What happens now?" Celine asked. "Now we wait for your father to hear the news and decide how he wants to respond. Could be days, could be weeks." Cade looked toward the northern ridge. "In the meantime, we keep working, keep building, keep making this place strong enough to withstand whatever's coming. And if Barrett comes back, then we deal with him. Together." Cade met her eyes, and something in his expression had shifted. Not softness exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement that they were truly in this together now, bound by law and circumstance and shared stubbornness. "You're not alone in this fight anymore, Celine. For better or worse, you've got a partner who's too mean to quit and too stubborn to surrender." Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the enormous risk they'd just taken, Celine felt herself smile. "I've been called worse things than stubborn." "I'll bet you have." Cade almost smiled back, just a ghost of expression that suggested the capability still existed somewhere beneath his armor. "Come on, we've got work to do before sunset." They fell into the rhythm of ranch life, working side by side with the easy coordination of people learning each other's patterns. Cade repaired fence posts while Celine organized the barn, creating systems where chaos had reigned. She cooked while he tended animals, their orbits intersecting at meals and in passing moments where small gestures replaced conversation, coffee left hot, tools cleaned and returned, work completed without being asked. 3 days passed in tense peace, then 4, then a week. Celine began to wonder if maybe her father had decided she wasn't worth the trouble, if maybe the public nature of her marriage had convinced him to cut his losses and move on. She should have known better. On the 8th day after their registration, Cade came back from checking the north pasture with his face set in hard lines. "Riders," he said tersely. 3 of them, watching the property from the ridge. They've been there for at least an hour, maybe longer." Celine's blood went cold. "Barrett? Too far to tell. But they're not ranch hands or drifters. Too well dressed, too organized." Cade moved to the gun cabinet, began checking ammunition. "Could be surveyors, could be your father's men, could be trouble we haven't even anticipated yet." "What do we do?" "We assume the worst and prepare for it." He handed her the smaller rifle. "You remember how to use this?" "I remember." "Good. Station yourself upstairs, window facing north. You'll have clear sight lines to the ridge and the approach road. I'll stay down here, cover the other angles." His voice was calm, methodical, the tone of someone who'd thought through scenarios like this before. "Most likely they're just watching, gathering information. But if they approach, I know, don't shoot unless they pose a direct threat. And if they do pose a threat?" Celine met his eyes steadily. "Then I shoot to stop them, not to kill. We don't need murder charges on top of everything else." Cade nodded approval. Smart thinking. He moved toward the window, keeping himself back from direct view. Whatever happens, stay calm. Don't let them see fear. Men like Barrett feed on fear. It tells them they're winning. They took up their positions, and the afternoon stretched into evening with agonizing slowness. The men on the ridge didn't approach, didn't reveal themselves clearly, just sat their horses and watched like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. As darkness fell, they finally withdrew, disappearing into the growing shadows. But their message was clear. We know where you are, we're watching, and we're patient enough to wait for the perfect moment. Cade and Celine maintained their vigil through the night, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. When dawn finally broke cold and gray over the mountains, the ridge was empty. But the threat remained, heavy and oppressive as storm clouds gathering on the horizon. They're planning something, Celine said over breakfast, her voice rough from lack of sleep. Barrett's not the type to just watch. He's gathering intelligence, looking for weaknesses, figuring out the best approach. Then we don't give him any weaknesses to find. Cade pushed his plate away, appetite gone. Starting today, we change our patterns. You don't work outside where you can be seen. I don't leave the property without armed backup. We assume every stranger who approaches is hostile until proven otherwise. That's no way to live. It's the way we live until this is finished. His expression was grim but determined. Your father wanted a quiet resolution where you came back willingly or were taken discreetly. We made that impossible by going public. Now he has to decide if he's willing to escalate to methods that could damage his reputation or cost him legally. And if he decides the risk is worth it? Cade's answer was simple and terrifying in its directness. Then we find out exactly how far we're willing to go to protect what's ours. The days that followed felt like living inside a held breath, waiting for something to break. Celine moved through the house like a ghost, always listening, always watching, her hand never far from the pistol she now kept tucked in her waistband. Cade worked the ranch with grim efficiency, but his eyes constantly scanned the ridgeline, the tree line, every shadow that might hide a threat. On the third morning after the watchers had appeared, a letter arrived. Cade found it wedged in the fence post nearest the road, sealed with expensive wax and addressed in elegant script. To Mrs. Celine Mercer. He brought it inside without opening it, his face carved from stone. It's from your father, he said, placing it on the kitchen table like it might explode. Celine stared at the envelope, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Her father had always insisted on writing important correspondence himself, believing typed letters lacked the personal authority his signature style conveyed. She'd seen that handwriting on birthday cards and business contracts alike, always accompanied by the implicit threat that Jonathan Vale's attention was both blessing and curse. You want me to open it? Cade asked. No, I need to do this. She picked up the envelope, broke the seal, and unfolded the single sheet of heavy paper inside. The message was brief, written in her father's characteristically direct style. Celine, she read aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Your theatrical performance with territorial marriage law has been duly noted. You may believe you found protection in legal documents and frontier isolation, but you've merely delayed the inevitable. Charles Whitmore remains committed to our arrangement, and I remain committed to seeing it fulfilled. You have 1 week to dissolve this fraudulent marriage and return home. If you refuse, I will be forced to take measures that will prove far more unpleasant for everyone involved, including your new husband. The choice, as always, is yours, but understand that every choice carries consequences you may not be prepared to face. Your father, Jonathan Vale. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Cade crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. That's it? No specifics about what these measures might be? No actual threats? He doesn't need to be specific. The threat is in what he's not saying. Celine set the letter down carefully, as if it might contaminate the table. My father built his fortune by making people understand that crossing him was more expensive than cooperation. He doesn't threaten directly, he just makes sure you understand the scope of what he's capable of and lets your imagination do the rest. So what's he capable of? Celine moved to the window, staring out at the ranch that had become her fortress. He could bribe the territorial governor to declare our marriage invalid on some technicality. He could buy the land around us until we're surrounded by his property. He could have you arrested on false charges, theft, fraud, kidnapping, and keep you tied up in court long enough that defending yourself bankrupts you. She turned to face Cade. Or he could simply hire men to make you disappear and call it a tragic accident. Frontier life is dangerous, after all. People die. He'd kill me? Cade's tone suggested he was more curious than afraid. If he thought it was necessary and could be done without consequences that hurt his business interests? Yes, without hesitation. She paused. My father sees people as assets or obstacles. Assets get used until they're no longer valuable. Obstacles get removed. Cade considered this for a long moment, then did something Celine didn't expect. He smiled. Not a warm smile, but the cold, hard expression of a man who'd just been handed a challenge he intended to win. Then I guess we'd better make sure removing me is expensive enough that he decides I'm not worth the trouble. How do we do that? By making your presence here as public and permanent as possible. Your father's operating on the assumption that this marriage is temporary, that you're hiding, that eventually he can isolate and extract you without causing a scene. Cade moved to the stove, poured coffee like they were discussing fence repairs instead of survival strategy. So we do the opposite. We make you visible, make you valuable to this community, make it so that anything happening to you or me becomes a scandal that damages his reputation. That could take months. Then we'd better work fast. He handed her a cup. Starting today, you become the most helpful, visible, indispensable woman Red Hollow has ever seen. You volunteer at the schoolhouse, you help organize community events, you make friends with every gossip and busybody in town. You become someone people care about, someone whose disappearance would raise questions your father can't afford to answer. Celine understood this strategy immediately. Jonathan Vale's power depended on operating in shadows, making problems disappear quietly. But if she became a beloved community figure, if people knew her story and supported her choice, then any move he made against her would have witnesses, consequences, and the kind of public scrutiny that could damage the carefully cultivated image he'd spent decades building. It's risky, she said. The more visible I am, the easier it is for Barrett or Whitmore's men to find opportunities to do what? Kidnap you in broad daylight from the middle of town? Attack you while you're surrounded by witnesses? Cade shook his head. Your father's strength is his ability to control narratives and buy silence. We take that away by making everything public, by building a community that would notice and care if something happened to you. And what about you? What's stopping them from just killing you and claiming it was self-defense or an accident? The same thing. I start being visible too. Start attending town meetings, helping neighbors with repairs, making myself someone people know and respect instead of the hermit they've been whispering about for 4 years. His jaw tightened. I've been hiding from life ever since Caroline died. Maybe it's time I stopped. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and possibly the only strategy with any chance of working. Traditional hiding had failed. Barrett had found her too quickly. Legal protection was fragile. Her father could challenge it a dozen ways. But community support, public visibility, the kind of social capital that made her disappearance or harm a genuine scandal. That was armor money couldn't easily penetrate. When do we start? Celine asked. Today. Right now. Cade set down his cup with decisive finality. Red Hollow's planning a harvest social next week. Perfect opportunity to introduce Mrs. Mercer to the community as someone who's here to stay. The week that followed tested Celine in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was one thing to survive on the run, moving through cities and towns as a ghost, never staying long enough to be remembered. It was entirely different to deliberately plant roots, to make herself known and vulnerable, to trust that community bonds would protect her better than anonymity ever had. She started small. A visit to the general store where she spent money and chatted with the owner about ranch supplies. A stop at the schoolhouse where the teacher, a tired woman named Ellen Pritchard, desperately needed help organizing donated books. Celine stayed for 3 hours, cataloging texts and repairing torn pages, while Ellen shared stories about students and struggles and the constant battle to provide education in a territory where survival often trumped learning. You've done this before, Ellen said, watching Celine's efficient work. Book organization, I mean. My mother believed education was the only real freedom. She made sure I understood how libraries worked before I learned to walk properly. Celine smiled at the memory, one of the few genuinely happy ones from her childhood. She would have loved this school. The idea that children here get any education at all despite the hardships. We do our best, though I'll admit, having someone who actually understands cataloging systems is more help than you know. Ellen hesitated, then added carefully, I heard about your situation, about why you came here. Celine's hand stilled on the book she'd been repairing. What exactly did you hear? That you ran from an arranged marriage back east, that your family has money and influence and wants you back, that you married Cade Mercer to stay hidden. Ellen's voice was gentle, without judgment. Martha Simmons has been spreading the story to anyone who'll listen, adding her own embellishments about scandal and impropriety. And what do you think? Ellen was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I think any woman brave enough to say no to a marriage she didn't want deserves respect, not gossip. I think running toward an uncertain future takes more courage than staying in a comfortable prison. And I think... She smiled slightly. I think Cade Mercer is lucky to have found someone who sees him as worth the risk. The simple kindness in those words hit Celine harder than she expected. She'd spent so long viewing relationships as transactions, alliances as strategic necessities, that genuine human warmth felt almost foreign. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me, just keep showing up, keep being visible and real, and someone this town can actually know, instead of just gossip about. Ellen handed her another damaged book. That's the best defense against rumors, being present enough that people form their own opinions instead of listening to Martha's speculation. Celine took the advice to heart. Over the following days, she became a fixture in Red Hollow, always finding reasons to be seen, to help, to connect. She assisted the doctor's wife with organizing medical supplies. She helped the blacksmith's daughter practice reading. She stopped at the post office and chatted with the clerk about ranch life. She made herself simultaneously ordinary and memorable, just another rancher's wife doing the community work all women did, but doing it with enough competence and warmth that people began nodding greetings instead of whispering speculation. Cade underwent his own transformation. He started attending the weekly town meetings, sitting in the back but present, his silence now companionable rather than hostile. He helped repair the church roof despite having no religious inclination, simply because the work needed doing and he had the skills. He shared coffee with Sheriff Hollis and discussed territorial politics. Slowly, grudgingly, Red Hollow began seeing him as something other than the grief-stricken hermit who'd spent 4 years hiding from life. The harvest social arrived on a Saturday afternoon, with most of Red Hollow gathered in the open space behind the town hall. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed food, children ran wild between the adults, and a small band attempted music with more enthusiasm than skill. It was exactly the kind of community event Celine had spent her entire Philadelphia life avoiding. Loud, chaotic, and full of people with no sense of social hierarchy or proper etiquette. She loved it immediately. Mrs. Mercer, Ellen Pritchard waved from near the food tables. Come meet some people. Celine allowed herself to be pulled into a circle of women ranging from young brides to weathered grandmothers, all curious about the mysterious woman who'd married Cade Mercer and stood up to Eastern money. They asked questions with varying degrees of subtlety, and Celine answered with careful honesty, sharing enough truth to satisfy curiosity without revealing details that might endanger anyone. Is it true your father owns railroads? A young woman named Sarah asked, eyes wide. He has investments in railroad expansion, yes. And he wanted you to marry someone horrible? He wanted me to marry someone I didn't love and who didn't love me. A business arrangement disguised as a wedding. Celine kept her voice steady, matter of fact. I chose differently. An older woman named Ruth, who'd been watching Celine with shrewd eyes, spoke up. And Cade? Did you choose him, or did you just choose escape? The question was sharp, cutting through the comfortable fiction that this was a romantic love story. Celine appreciated the directness. I chose survival first, she admitted. I chose a marriage contract that offered protection and distance from people who believed they owned me, but I'm choosing to stay for different reasons now. What reasons? Celine glanced across the social to where Cade stood with a group of ranchers, looking uncomfortable but present. Because this place, this ranch, this town, this life, it's mine in a way nothing back east ever was. I'm building something here that belongs to me, not to my father's expectations or society's rules. And Cade, She paused, surprised by the truth of what she was about to say. Cade gave me the space to figure out who I wanted to be, instead of demanding I become what he needed. That's worth staying for. The women absorbed this, and Celine saw various expressions: understanding, approval, and from a few of the younger ones, envy. In a world where most marriages were arranged by practical necessity or family pressure, the idea of choosing based on partnership rather than passion or duty was quietly revolutionary. Ruth nodded slowly. Well then, welcome to Red Hollow, Mrs. Mercer. Try the apple pie before it's gone. Martha Simmons made it. And whatever else you can say about that woman, she bakes like an angel. The ice broken, Celine found herself pulled into the community with startling ease. She learned names and faces, heard stories about winter hardships and summer droughts, discovered the complex web of relationships and rivalries that made small-town life both comforting and suffocating. She laughed at jokes she didn't fully understand, tasted food that would have horrified Philadelphia society cooks, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the possibility of belonging. Cade found her as afternoon faded toward evening, offering his hand with awkward formality. The band's attempting a waltz, figured we should at least pretend to be a married couple who likes each other. Only pretending? Celine took his hand, allowing him to lead her to the clearing where other couples were attempting to dance. I don't dance well. Neither do I. We'll fit right in. They moved together with the careful synchronization of people still learning each other's rhythms. Not graceful, but not terrible either. Around them, Red Hollow watched with varying degrees of interest and approval, witnessing the marriage become something more than legal paperwork. You're good at this, Cade said quietly. The community thing. Making people like you. I was trained for it. Philadelphia society demanded perfect social performance. Celine followed his lead through a turn. I just hated every minute because none of it was real. This, though, is different, is honest. These people don't care about my father's money or my family name. They care about whether I'll show up when the schoolhouse needs help or contribute to the harvest social. It's transactional in the best possible way. You give to the community gives back. Cade was quiet for a moment, his hand steady at her waist. That's what I forgot after Caroline died. How to be part of something larger than my own grief. How to let people matter again. He met her eyes. You're reminding me it's possible. Before Celine could respond, the music stopped abruptly. Sheriff Hollis had stepped onto the makeshift stage, his expression grim. Folks, I need your attention. The crowd quieted, sensing trouble. Hollis cleared his throat. Just received a telegraph from the territorial capital. There's been a formal inquiry filed regarding Mrs. Celine Mercer, née Vale. Claims of kidnapping, mental incompetence, and illegal marriage have been submitted to the territorial governor by parties representing the Vale family interests. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Celine felt Cade's hand tighten on hers, protective and anchoring. Hollis continued. Now, I've been asked to investigate these claims and provide a report within 10 days, which means I'll need to interview both Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, gather statements from witnesses who can attest to the legitimacy of their marriage, and document Mrs. Mercer's mental state and voluntary participation in all proceedings. Martha Simmons' voice rang out, sharp with vindication. I knew it! I told you all this was suspicious. Martha, hush. Ruth's tone brooked no argument. Sheriff, what exactly are these parties claiming? That Mrs. Mercer was coerced or deceived into marriage? That she's not of sound mind to make legal decisions? And that Mr. Mercer is holding her against her will for purposes of extortion? Hollis's eyes found Celine and Cade in the crowd. Obviously, anyone with eyes can see that's nonsense, but the law requires investigation when formal complaints are filed, especially when they come from someone with Jonathan Vale's resources and connections. Ellen Pritchard spoke up, her voice clear and firm. I'll testify. Mrs. Mercer has been helping at the schoolhouse for a week now, and she's perfectly competent, kind, and clearly here of her own free will. I'll testify too, Sarah added. She helped my mother with sewing just yesterday, and we talked for hours. She's not being held prisoner. She's building a life here. More voices joined in, a chorus of community support that made Celine's throat tight with unexpected emotion. These people barely knew her, yet they were willing to stand between her and her father's legal assault. It was the protection Cade had predicted, but experiencing it felt entirely different from strategizing about it. Hollis held up his hand for quiet. I appreciate everyone's willingness to help.